Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Keto Lifestyle for Mental Health. Thank you for joining us today. We have a special guest, a lived experience, and a Fresh Start Award winner, Oliver Seligman, who was generous enough with his time to join us and share a little bit more about his wisdom, his experience from living with bipolar, utilizing the ketogenic diet and more. What I am most passionate and inspired by from what I've learned from Oliver's work is that he has dealt with this, like many of us, for so long, over 3 decades now, that to me, it seems like he really has reached that point of deep understanding and embracing the good and the bad with the disorder, and like finding really ways to deal with it as best as possible. And that usually is not just one dimension, right? Like we come together to discuss the ketogenic diet as a metabolic therapy for mental health, and many of us have benefited tremendously. But I think Oliver has something more to offer in addition to that, which obviously is one of the tools that he has utilized in his own success. So I cannot wait to hear from you, Oliver, your story and kind of your journey with bipolar and what has helped you and what has not, so that people can relate potentially at whatever stage they are. But I'm just inspired by the depth that you bring to this kind of recovery work. And I'm personally really touched by what you've shared. So Oliver has a YouTube channel called Thrive with Bipolar. All of you can check it out, where he shares immense amount of information that I find really helpful. He's also the author of 2 books. One of them is called Befriending Bipolar. The other one is The Broker Who Broke Free. But he's very open about his experience and his wisdom and learned lessons on the way. So, Oliver, without a further ado, thank you for being here and welcome to the group. Do you mind sharing with us a little bit about kind of what you describe your journey? I know it started for you pretty early on and you've been on it for a while, but kind of get us into your world in terms of where did it all start, and maybe at what point you were introduced to the ketogenic diet specifically, since this is kind of like the focus of this group. And then we can elaborate more on that, but you can tell us on the other additional things that have helped you.
Sure, sure. Well, thanks very much for your kind introduction, and hello, everyone. It's nice to meet you, even though it's over the computer waves, whatever they are. Um, well, basically, in 1993, I was in my last year of school. I was at boarding school in England, and I started to get more and more confident and happy, and I started to get all these like feelings of love and bliss and excitement. And I didn't think about it at all. I just thought it was great. I wasn't, particularly self-aware at that age at all. So it was more like something was happening to me, but I didn't necessarily even particularly notice it was happening. I just felt really, really good. And it's my final year, so I had these sort of very important sort of end of high school exams, as you call in America anyway. And I went home for the holidays, sort of having planned to do lots of work and revision, as all my friends were going to do. And I didn't open a textbook because I started kind of talking to myself, and I started sort of believing that I was this sort of amazing genius who would get through his exams without any problems at all. And yeah, there you go. So I then came back from holidays having been really happy over the holidays, but also very, very ungrounded at the same time. No one seemed to notice. My parents didn't really care. I don't think, generally speaking, parents are too worried if they have a happy teenager in the house. Don't tend to question it too much. But basically, I came back to school, and suddenly I realized that exams were starting in like 5 days, and I hadn't done anything. And I started to panic. And then my what was a hypomania, sort of moving into mania, started to become, I think, what they call now a mixed episode, But basically, in my book, I talk about it going from a euphoric mania into an agitated mania. And that was when my mind really hit me. And the paranoia and the panic and the nervousness and the negative thinking that had just been completely absent for the weeks before just hit me like a truck. And rather than ask anyone for help, rather than do any of the things that a lot of people would be able to do today, because it was, gosh, 33 years ago, I just kind of kept going, didn't really think about it. I just knew I was having a horrible time. But I also thought, this is the exam period, this is the way it is. So I slept less and less. I used hypnosis tapes to kind of crush information into my head as best I could. And I got through the exams and I actually got straight A's, which was quite miraculous. It shows a certain power of even a very negative mania, actually. And then, long story short, rather than sort of going home and relaxing, which I'd always done throughout my life, my parents, I've been very lucky because my parents had always created this kind of very safe, cozy place to be for me and my brother and sister. Like we were brought up in the countryside in Scotland. And it was always a place I'd go home and I'd be with the dogs and I'd go out running and do walks and I'd always kind of unwind. But this time I couldn't. It was like the mania had just completely got hold of me. And the whole story ended with me going on holiday with some friends and really, really just annoying them and winding them up. I think I stole 20 quid from one friend. I stole another friend's car and hid it, which I thought was absolutely hysterical. And in another context, it could have been quite funny because we were always playing jokes on each other. But I'd been so difficult, so fast, so agitated, so abrasive that by that stage, most of my friends were just had had enough of me. And then I went home, and that's when I really crashed. And I ended up being admitted to the Royal Edinburgh Mental Hospital, where I then was given a drug called haloperidol, which is quite a hardcore antipsychotic. And it got me out of the psychosis, out of the mania, but it really drove me into a really deep depression. Which was probably waiting for me anyway, because that often seems to happen with us, that when we've been high for a while, we also get the yin and the yang. And that was kind of when I was diagnosed with bipolar aged, I think it was just 18. Yeah.
Wow, wow. Thank you so much for sharing. So I think it's so easy for me to relate. And it sounds like you really, really have had the time to reflect back and kind of highlight those moments of like you can see it so clearly, right? Like it's almost as if while when you're in it, it's very hard to distinguish. So thank you for that really clear description of that I think so many of us that have the same diagnosis can relate to. And your journey started long ago, you mentioned. So tell us more about the ways that you started dealing with it. How was it for you? What did you try? What kind of strategies and coping mechanisms, or like what was helpful for you as you started on that, starting having those symptoms?
Yeah. Well, my first strategy was, I think quite a common one, maybe not the most helpful one, but it was just denial.
Denial.
I went through the whole sort of mental hospital system and I had a great psychiatrist who was very keen on me not kind of letting bipolar destroy my life. So the kind of approach he took was, look, take your medication, because I ended up on lithium after about a year and a half of sort of trying no medication, antidepressants, different things like that. And he eventually said, look, it might be a good idea to do this drug lithium. And lithium worked really well for me, particularly for the first sort of, 10 years or so. And so my kind of instructions were, and remembering this was quite a long time ago, my instructions were take your medication and just get on with life. Do your best, have a good time, follow your dreams. In many ways, are very helpful instructions, particularly because I was a young man and I wanted to get out there. And, all my friends were at university, then they were getting jobs, and I was feeling like I was falling behind. So what I did was I took my medication. I took 1,000 milligrams of lithium every night for probably 12, 13 years and just got on with life. And the lithium worked well in that I didn't have any depressions and I didn't have any serious manias. But a lot of the time I was still in hypomania. I was still very, very fast and very intense. And I noticed over the years the side effects of lithium, the sort of the damage that it was starting to do just started to build. So yeah, my first tactic for the first decade was denial and just crack on with life. It worked quite well. I had a really good time. I had amazing adventures. I had a lot of fun. I met a lot of cool people. I had a job as a sales trader in a top investment bank for 3 years. I sort of ticked a lot of boxes of things that I think I really sort of needed or wanted to do. But the really big negative side, which I only discovered years later, was that lithium just removed my emotional life from me. It removed my emotional compass. It removed the sort of the sensitivity to life, to other people, to situations. And so I could be pretty tough. I could be pretty mean. And I had that in me anyway. It wasn't like suddenly, I was transformed from this angel or whatever, but it was like I was detached from life and I was detached from myself. And that caused a lot of problems. And it caused a lot of problems in relationships and all that stuff. But to be fair on lithium, because I'm not anti medication at all, but to be fair on lithium, had I not had it, and back then there really were no other alternatives, well, then I'd have been seriously depressed and seriously manic quite regularly. So again, I like to talk with nuance about these things, and I don't want to come across as sort of particularly anti or even particularly pro anything. I feel everyone has to find their own way.
Absolutely. I so agree with that. And I think it also everyone's journey unfolds at a different speed, and medications may very well, just like in my case, have their place, and without them we cannot find that more of a long-term strategy, more sustainable, side effect free type of way to live and deal with the disorder. I know also for myself that medications were helpful back then, just because probably I would not have be able to utilize such a the ketogenic diet the way I did it back like in 6 years or whatever. So I appreciate the honesty about that, and also that reflection of, yes, I was not severely depressed or in mania, but that came at a cost, and that's usually the case, like take or leave. And it's we most of the time have to pick our battles, so to speak. It's just hard to get one solution that's super clean and it's only positive and all that. So yeah.
Well said.
Yeah, yeah. And okay, and so it sounded like that was your portion of life when you were dealing with denial and taking the lithium. And what followed after that, or what changed?
Well, what changed was I started coming into contact with people who were kind of alternative healers and people who were um, had very strong opinions about medication, and they were negative. And the big problem was that these people's opinions weren't informed, but I trusted them. I believed them. I was pretty naive in many ways, and I think actually also being on a high dose of lithium, it made me just generally less discerning, less wise, and so basically, I thought to myself, well, it's been, I guess it was somewhere between 10 and 15 years that since my last episode, and I've done lots of good work. I've been meditating. I've kind of looked after myself reasonably well. And I just started to come off my medication just fairly slowly, but without any help, without telling anyone or talking to a doctor, these kind of things that seem fairly common sense these days. I just didn't think about it. And I came down off lithium, and about 3 days, I was in Australia at the time, so I was abroad on the other side of the world. I mean, everything was, when I look back, it was the most ridiculous thing to do. But at the time, it just seemed logical. I didn't really know anything about any of this, including bipolar. I hadn't read anything, hadn't gone to peer support groups or any of that stuff. I'm not sure they even existed then. But basically, took my last sort of tiny dose of lithium as I'd come down, and 3 days later, I ended up trashing the house that I lived in, sort of peeing all over the house, peeing all over my housemates' beds, wrapped up in toilet paper with a big cut on my stomach because I'd been up on a roof that I was just about to jump off. And luckily I didn't because I thought I could fly. I was completely just gone in this mania, which I think in many ways was far worse than anything I'd experienced before because it was combined with, coming off the medication. So you probably had a lot of things involved in that. You had the body dealing with withdrawals, perhaps a big sort of detox, and also the fact that I'd been on this strong medication for 12 years and suddenly I wasn't. So it was a kind of perfect storm. And my friends came back and the police turned up because I sort of phoned them and they panicked. And the police basically took me to another, local mental hospital in a place called Terragor. And that's when I went back on antipsychotics and the whole sort of horrible dance began with the depression and it taking a long time for my brain to recover. So that happened. And then I vowed never to come off lithium again, as it's probably quite understandable. But sure enough, 6 or 7 years later, I found myself surrounded by homeopaths this time at a homeopathic sort of training school in Oslo. And they were just needed people to do their training on. And I just sort of casually mentioned that I took lithium. And again, it was the same reaction. So, oh, it's really toxic, all this stuff, without any nuance. I mean, to their credit, they were just students, but it's still, I fell for it again. And I thought, it's time. And so I tried the same thing again and it went the same way. Um, yeah, there you go. Hmm.
Wow, wow. Okay. Yeah, I think that probably is the continuation. I'm curious, like when you are considering getting off meds, was that still part of the decision? Was it driven by the denial that you were hoping that this is no longer something you have to deal with? Or was it just genuine need of not dealing with the way the medications made you feel, the downsides of it, right? Like you mentioned, just being kind of more emotionally disconnected, or what would make you consider getting off the meds
Hmm.
the second time, especially now that you've experienced such a severe consequences? You've been there, you've done it once. What was it
Yeah.
like the second time?
Yeah, the second time it was different because the second time I had learned a bit. So I did get help, but unfortunately I got help from the wrong people. I got help from a homeopath, and my experience was that homeopathy was definitely not strong enough to deal with what I was going to go through. And then I ended up going up to these supplement people in Canada who help a lot of people with mental illness, actually. But that went wrong too. They didn't really understand how ill I was and how I was getting, and the the whole process of coming off was too quick as far as I'm concerned. But at least that time I did ask for help. I was at least sort of trying to do it responsibly and properly. But I think it's really interesting you asked me what drove me because I've never thought about that. And I think it was probably a few things. I think the first time I came off, I was driven by just being a young, ambitious guy who wanted to be free of this thing that I think probably subconsciously I saw as a weakness. But also, it wasn't such a big decision for me. I didn't sort of really comprehend the risk. And the second time, I think it was very much, I'd become more aware that, any medication that we take long term can have long term effects. And I didn't want that. And if I could, I wanted to be medication free. But I think it was mainly the idea of being medication free that actually drove me on. I don't think there was as much logic in it as I've sort of latterly discovered, because it was almost like the second time I came off it. And it was really, again, it was just hell on earth for 2.5 years, I think in total. I lost 4 years of my life, basically, from the whole process. And it was only after that that I woke up one day and I started laughing. And I hadn't been laughing much, as you can imagine, the last few years. And I wandered into the living room. My wife was there and she was like, "What are you laughing at?" I said, "I suddenly realized that I need to accept that I have a mental illness." And so this was like 20 years after being diagnosed. I mean, I think I was 40. Yeah, please don't try and do the maths because none of my dates will make sense. I've got terrible memory. But basically, it was like age 40, it suddenly landed on me. that what I'd been doing was just crazy, and that I had this illness and I need to address it, and I needed to kind of take charge of my life rather than just go in this sort of roller coaster of trying to improve it, trying to come off medication. And that was actually in accepting that I had bipolar, that was actually when things started to really change for the better.
I love hearing that. And I think what stood out for me by getting more familiar with your work is exactly this piece, the acceptance of the disorder, right? Like I'm being diagnosed with this disorder, and so many of us, myself included, are trying to kind of erase it and like push it aside and heal it and like revert, like get rid of it, be done with it, but from a place of not accepting it, which is very different than acceptance and then dealing with it in the best possible way that can um can provide a really fulfilling life with not as much disturbances, right? Like it could be being at peace with whatever you have and making the best out of it. And I think this is such a key piece from, being there myself and also working with others who are dealing with the same thing. A lot of people come to this approach of the ketogenic therapy as a way to escape versus dealing with it. And obviously we can get to that in terms of the benefits we can get, but I think it's just like I just want to highlight that piece of acceptance that you're bringing to the front, which I think over the long term is absolutely crucial. And whoever does not meet it and deal with the disorder from that place, it can just look completely different. And so you got to the place where you realize that acceptance is the key. And can you tell us, I know a lot of people are, I know certainly for myself, when I first heard it, I'm like, okay, acceptance doesn't mean being okay with what is and just not doing anything about it. What was acceptance like for you? In a way that did you deal with it? Did you just accept it and made peace and stop worrying about it? What was it like exactly?
Well, I think some people are afraid of accepting situations because they think it's like rolling over and just letting the universe smack you around. I think that's quite a big fear for a lot of people. But what I discovered was acceptance is actually the best way to move forward and then try to change things. But there isn't this strong emotional need to change things. There is much more of a kind of like this, these are the cards I've been dealt. This is the way life is. Yes, I would like to change it. Yes, I'm going to put energy into changing it, but I'm not going to pin my dreams and my hopes and my emotional life on it changing because it might not. And particularly with something like bipolar, it could go wrong. There are a lot of people who have a lot of success with the ketogenic diet and metabolic therapies, and even fecal transplants are now starting to be used to treat bipolar. But then there are also others who have really bad episodes too, and there's no guarantees in any of this. But I think that my ability to accept it actually, if I'm really, really honest, it didn't feel like I accepted bipolar. It felt like acceptance just landed on me. It felt like after all the suffering I'd been through and the kind of fighting against life, fighting against the way things are, thinking it was unfair, thinking I had to somehow get over bipolar, it was like I just gave in. And I was like, you know what? I have bipolar. This is life. This is reality. Now, whether I think that's fair or not is kind of irrelevant because our opinions really have no influence on reality. Reality is reality. You know, people have bipolar, people get cancer, people die, people win the lottery, people fall in love. All these things happen in life. But I had this such a strong idea that there was something wrong with the whole situation. And yet now I look back on my journey with bipolar, and although I wouldn't want to go through any of those experiences again, I can see the perfection in it. I can see how I'm able to help other people and share, and I can see that I've become a much more open, wise person. It's so funny because I've lived with bipolar for 33 years or something. And in some areas, yeah, I am an expert in some areas, but in other areas, I'm completely learning. So, for example, Donica, when you asked me the question earlier, I've never even thought about that aspect of life. So I guess, sorry, I'm rambling a bit, but coming back to acceptance, one of the biggest keys for acceptance, I think, for me, was that I had been on a spiritual path for about 10 years. And that part of that spiritual path was learning more acceptance. And eventually that translated into me sort of being able to accept what I would say was almost the unacceptable in some ways.
Right, right. Yeah, I think that's very important. And I think that's really, really important to then start making the changes, right? From that place of accepting it and then dealing with it almost, where we're not accepting it to give up or to just, lay down and do nothing. But actually, that frees us to start taking action from a more realistic, grounded place and an action that is more probably sustainable and just more long-term oriented.
Yeah.
So tell us
Mm.
about that action and how your journey unfolded after the
Yeah.
acceptance and eventually how you learned about what were kind of your ways to get to a better place where you see now.
Well, I mean, I think you're absolutely right about acceptance. I think that acceptance provides a lot of things. It provides balance. It provides the ability to look at a situation with more distance. We're not totally immersed in it. Um, and for me, I think it was a huge day. I mean, I actually remember when it happened, but it was a huge day because by that stage, I was back on lithium. So I'd had to go through 4.5 years of trying to come off it, then coming off it for 2 years, suffering a lot, psychoses, depressions, whatever. And then in a mental hospital in Norway, I've kind of done a world tour of mental hospitals. In a mental hospital in Norway, realizing that I actually needed to go back on lithium. I actually needed this medication. So I then went back on lithium. So it was like the whole thing had sort of failed sort of terribly. But when I went back on lithium, it was like a lot of the work I'd done through meditation and spirituality stuff, it was like it landed and it was really able to manifest. Because what I've discovered is that for at least for me, I can only talk for me, but this probably translates to quite a few people with mental illnesses. But things like meditation, things like going for walks in the word, things like psychotherapy, like they can all help tremendously. And for some people, they seem to be enough. But if our biology is off, it's almost like all of these other strategies, they either have a minimal effect or no effect. And my biology was off without lithium. That was just the way I am. And so when I accepted it and I started laughing, I was actually, it was actually a period where despite what I'd been through, I was at peace. I was happy and I was at peace, even though my life was completely gone compared to what it used to be. I had a lovely wife. I'm lucky we live in a nice little flat in Oslo. I was supported by the government and I could just see, look, this is okay. I can move forward from here. But now that I've stopped fighting bipolar and fighting my situation, I can actually potentially move forward. And it was magic because literally within 3 days, someone contacted my wife who said that they were a healer and they could potentially help her with. She had burnout, I think, at the time, in big part because of me and I'd been ill and whatever. And she said, actually, I'm actually doing really well, but you could maybe help my husband. And so this woman started giving me sort of healing, and I got a phone call from a job that I'd had 5 years before, offering me the job back. It was just like being a janitor at this school in Norway, but I really enjoyed it. And so all these things just started coming into my life, and I didn't do anything for it. It was genuinely magical, and I'm sure it came from acceptance. And then things started to sort of build, and I was still very, very sick physically, and I still am quite sick physically now, because when someone comes off lithium, if you go back on it, sometimes it doesn't work. And I was lucky because it worked for me mentally. But physically, I was getting 2 or 3 migraines a week. I was absolutely exhausted. I obviously went straight back to having all the emotional stuff that no longer existed, etc., etc. But by complete chance, I applied for a master's degree at Edinburgh University, and I got in, and I went over there, and that was when I was introduced to ketogenic therapy, and I was on the pilot star that Ian Campbell and Nicole Needham ran, which was like the first one for bipolar in Europe, and keto really helped me, and that was really when things started to move forward. And I was actually, over the last 3 years, I've been able to lower my lithium dose from, it was eventually at 1,200 milligrams a day, and I'm now on about 300, I think. And touch wood, I'm feeling more stable and more relaxed and fewer side effects than ever.
Wow, that's a four-time reduction in medication. That's quite significant. So tell us more about that now that, probably that's where people are really, people in this group and whoever is watching are kind of at that stage of trying to implement this therapeutic metabolic approach for their mental health. Tell us in your experience, obviously everyone is different, but we can probably relate and kind of learn what to expect or what may have worked for you. What was that journey like? When you started, kind of like, even what thoughts did you have about it? I know for myself, when I heard first the ketogenic diet, I desperately needed a solution. But let me tell you, having a diet to treat mental illness while I was medicated, and I was told I'm going to be on this medication for the rest of my life to treat my serious mental illness, sounded like a complete joke. And secondly, having like such a high fat diet was in so much it was just against everything I knew about healthy lifestyle. So I'm curious to know about your initial thoughts, and probably you were introduced to it in a context of like a school that's a lot more probably evidence based and more reliable type of info. But how was that for you when you heard initially about that option?
Well, the fact that it was a scientific trial run by Edinburgh and Glasgow University definitely made me feel a bit more secure about the whole thing. That was cool. But still, it was an experiment. They're still at the beginning of the research with keto, and so far a lot of the results are amazing. But there isn't a huge body of evidence as far as its effects on bipolar. But its effects on epilepsy, it's incredibly well documented. And it's been used since the 20s and the 30s to treat people very successfully. So that's quite hopeful. And interestingly enough, a lot of the medications that are given to people with bipolar were designed for people with epilepsy. So there's these sort of interesting metabolic connections. But I think for me, this is actually where my two sort of disastrous coming off medication episodes, where they actually had some positive benefits for me because I knew what it was like to lower, and I knew the warning signs of me getting ill or it going wrong. So I had a certain amount of security in believing that I could probably come down quite a bit and I'd probably be okay, particularly if this diet worked. But if things started to go well, I could just take antipsychotics because I had those from my doctor. They'd been like a safety net for me in the background. And I talked to my wife about it, and by this stage, I'd written Befriending Bipolar, my book, and I was surrounded by more people who were using keto, and a lot of them were really grown up and cool people, and I liked that a lot. So I felt, there's a certain maturity in this environment, and there were just a lot of things that were very supportive, and I talked to my wife about it a lot, obviously, because she'd been through the second lowering with me and been an absolute star and really suffered from it, unfortunately. Um, but we just decided, why not? And so I started the keto diet. And I have to laugh because in some of my earlier interviews, like I say, it was amazing doing keto because I felt this kind of warm bath, like for my brain. It was just a lovely experience. And that was really, really cool. But it could also have been potentiation. It could be the lithium becoming more powerful because that sometimes happens with the ketogenic diet, that the medication gets more powerful, or at least the side effects get stronger. And anyway, this happened to me. I felt very peaceful and very dopey, but I realized I couldn't use my brain, and I started getting headaches, and that was when I actually lowered the lithium a bit. I sort of talked to my doctor about it, and I think because I felt relaxed, my doctor was very relaxed about it. I wasn't used to talking to doctors about medication and them being kind of cool about it. In the past, there'd always been this edginess and kind of a bit of aggression between me and, as I'm sure a lot of you have perhaps experienced. Um, but I just lowered it a bit and just hoped for the best. And I knew I had a lot of good backup plans. I had a lot of support. Um, and then that has just sort of continued for the last, it's almost 3 years now, I think. And I got to around about 300 milligrams. I don't know exactly because the milligram thing is different in Norway where I live. But I kind of got to that sort of stage and I kind of thought things are going really well. I'll take a pause, or maybe I won't lower anymore. I feel that that's been very important for me, not to have this goal of getting off medication, not to, because I had that before, but instead being more wise about it and just feeling my way through the process, making sure I've got backup, and realizing that it could go wrong. I'm not sitting here saying, come off your medication. It's such a great thing, keto diet, blah, blah, blah. What I'm saying is that I, after many bad experiences, got to a place where I felt with support, I could experiment in this way. And so far, it's going well. But I won't know if it's gone well until I've, been on the same dose, or off the medication, who knows, for say, I don't know, 6 months, a year. And then I could probably start saying, this has worked, But even then, I don't think I would tempt fate. I don't think I would ever disrespect bipolar. And sort of tempting fate sounds a bit too superstitious, doesn't it? But I think it's important to have a certain humility to the illness and to the potential of healing as well, but just to be kind of, yeah, quite humble within it if we can.
I love that. I love that. That's a really great way to put it. Not disrespecting the illness. We still do our best, but and what did, if you can just summarize it for us, what is your regimen on keto? What does that look like? And if you can compare it, in terms of how powerful it is, what are some of the differences that it has made to your mood? I assume is the probably the bigger one, or energy. So yeah, if you can just briefly tell us about what keto looks like and how it helps you feel better.
Yeah, cool. Well, first of all, I mean, I still have a lot of sort of brain fog and I have a bad memory. So I'm definitely not one of these incredibly impressive, disciplined individuals who's figured it all out and does it every day. That unfortunately is just not me. I'm more, I'm more on the artistic side of life. Um, but basically, I wake up in the morning and I often have a bulletproof coffee with my wife, which we love doing. It's like a ritual. Like if we can go out to the woods and do it there, we sometimes do that. If we go to a cafe, we do that. Sometimes we do it at home. But and again, I'm not recommending this because a lot of people say, coffee's not good for this and that and whatever. But from my perspective, I need to have fun in my life. I cannot have a diet or a regime that just leaves no room for fun or for pleasure, because it's not sustainable for me. So I have coffee, and I have bulletproof coffee, which has lots of fat in it, either MCT oil, sometimes just butter that I sort of whip up in a sort of cafe latte thing that we bought, and I have stevia in it as well. I love stevia because I've got a sweet tooth, and if people ever talk about the negatives of stevia, I just do that because it's too painful because I'm not going to give it up. Um, but basically, that's my the first thing I do. If I'm really on it, I might go for a walk in, maybe in the woods in nature. But often I'll then just meditate for half an hour, 45 minutes, because I love that, and it's a very peaceful experience. Then sometimes if I'm hungry, I'll have breakfast. And breakfast would usually be either bacon and eggs and mushrooms, with a bit of butter. Sometimes it would be a salad, like healthier, breakfast, depending on your perspective. I'm not very good at having arguments about diets because I don't really care that much. I'd rather just do what works for me. Um, so that would be breakfast. But generally speaking, I do actually miss breakfast these days, which is cool. And then lunch, I would have a salad and then, some meat with it, or a bit of salmon, or some cheese, that kind of thing. But plenty of fat, plenty of oil. I love avocados. Um, I love coconut oil. And then in the evening, kind of similar, often a salad or sort of broccoli and cauliflower, sort of low carb veggies with some kind of sort of meat protein, and a bit of fat and stuff. Um, Quite often now throughout the day, not every day, but quite often I have like a high fat keto chocolate mousse, which I make out of coconut cream, not coconut milk, but coconut cream, full fat coconut cream, a little bit of chocolate powder and stevia and some salt. Salt's really important actually for the flavor, because that just gives me a pump of fat. So that's kind of my diet. And one of the things I often talk about is like people ask me about the keto diet. And first of all, I don't know as much about the diet as a lot of people. I haven't got the mental capacity these days, partly because of lithium and partly because of being on medication for 30 years. It kind of does stuff here. But so I never get into arguments with people about it. I couldn't care less what people do and whatever. But for me, keto works really well because it just calms my nervous system down. I don't have a lot of thoughts these days. I mean, I've been meditating for 23 years, so that's really helped with that. And the keto gives this calmness to my whole system. So my cholesterol went up a lot when I started keto. It went up to about 9.9. Recently, I've been taking omega 3s, which seems to have taken it down to about 7. Something has, and that's the only thing I can think of. So that's interesting. But basically, I never try to argue with people that keto is really healthy or this or that. All I say is it's fabulous for my mental health. And it's clearly been the missing link for me. I do think keto and the meditation together have been the missing link because the meditation has really allowed me to let go of a lot of the negative thinking, a lot of the anxiety and the panic and the perfectionism that I see in myself and in a lot of people with mental illness, this kind of intensity. So I think between those two and having, a loving relationship and getting out in nature and not getting too stressed out, things are going really well. So yeah, touch wood.
Amazing. Yeah, that's really great to hear and such a grounded perspective on it, right? Like I love that you're not as strict or rigid about it. I think that has a lot of value for so many people. And so it sounds like also this additional tool, meditation, has been pretty foundational for you, for your journey and well-being and where you are today. Those of you who want to learn more about, I know Oliver, you share about your like best ways to stay in ketosis or like 18 ways to stay in ketosis in ways that are meaningful for mental health. So definitely follow Oliver's YouTube channel, Thrive with Bipolar, and you can learn more about the specific strategies and his recommendations. Um, so, Oliver, another question that I have for you is where do you see yourself with this metabolic strategy? Is that something you intend to keep up with? It sounds like it's working well for you. Do you find it sustainable? I also hear that you've implemented it in a way that does not probably feel too restrictive. You have your pleasures within the diet that make it compatible. So I'm curious, is that something that you would that you see yourself doing for the rest of your life, or you have no such plans yet, or where are you at in that in that
Yeah,
perspective?
that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I have no idea. I imagine I'll keep going for as long as I feel I need it and it works. And I would have no problem doing it for the rest of my life. That's not a problem for me. But I also, having spoken to a few people, there are definitely some people who they do keto for 2 or 3 or 4 years, and then they start to move on to sort of low carb and sometimes they break keto and they find, oh, actually, I'm okay for a while breaking it. And then maybe they get a bit down or a bit anxious. So they go back. And I've had similar experiences. So I'm very open to the possibility that keto might actually heal my brain. That would be amazing. But if it didn't and it just acts as this wonderful support, then that's really cool for me too. Yeah, I've just become very pragmatic about everything. And also, one of the ways that I managed to stay on keto, because I started it and then I came off it and then I went back on again, was that I was actually put on a carnivore diet for, I think, 6 weeks, 5 or 6 weeks by a doctor as part of some sort of detox. I don't know why it was, but it was to do with working out. Oh, it was allergies. That was it, to see if I had allergies. So I went on the carnivore diet, which was really good. I thought it was brilliant. Apart from having serious diarrhea, that was the only sort of disadvantage. But I really enjoy carnivore. But it was so restrictive. I mean, only meat and eggs was basically what I ate, and I occasionally had a bit of cheese, but I had to stay away from that because of the allergy stuff. But then when I moved back to keto from carnivore, it was like a banquet. And ever since then, I've had no problems. So I don't know. I don't know if I'd recommend it because carnivore's pretty hardcore. But it worked for me just to do something so restrictive for 5 weeks and then come back to keto, and it's like, woohoo!
Right, right. That's a good way. Like once you see that it could be even worse, you get
Yeah,
to appreciate where you're at.
yeah.
Yeah. I just love your sense of lightness and kind of acceptance and just how you relate to all of this. I think it's very refreshing.
I think spirituality, certainly when I started, 25 years ago, it was seriously black and white. This can save everything. This can heal everything. I mean, you read some of the earlier books people wrote about meditation, claiming it could heal everything,
Right.
and the people, obviously, they were doing their best at the time, but it wasn't very helpful for me. It definitely led me the wrong way. I do think that in general, in America, there's binary thinking that I think now with Donald Trump being in charge, you're starting to hopefully move beyond it, because I think there's been a real immaturity to America as a country, and a real reacting against the European ancestors, and having two parties, and having, we're seeing this polarization within the whole culture, which I actually think is quite healthy, because it gives people the opportunity to actually start to make friends and try and figure things out, which I think will happen, actually. But I do think Americans particularly, and I'm hugely generalizing now, and I think lots of Americans are highly intelligent and very nuanced, but there is a culture there of binary, of right and wrong, of I found the solution, no, I haven't, of this is right, that's wrong. That exists in Europe as well, definitely. But I think it's very apparent in a way, a lot of the American YouTube channels and people, the way they talk. There's a lot of people on YouTube going saying, I've cured my bipolar. And it's like, mate, you're still taking meds and you've been well for 4 months. You ain't cured your bipolar. You might have done, but tell me in 2 years' time. So I think that side of life is, I do believe in consciousness sort of evolving and changing. And I do believe that as a humanity, and I think America, particularly as a country, is probably evolving very fast now. There's a lot of growing up needs to be done in America and in Europe. But you guys have created Donald Trump. You've created a lot of chaos, a lot of fear, and all that stuff. And my belief is it's going to go well, actually, because there's a lot of seriously cool people in America and a lot of very intelligent, wise people in America, but their voices haven't been heard for a very long time. So that's my kind of brief political whatever. Please don't hammer me in the comments. I'm just talking. Yeah. Yeah, I do think that that's one thing that we can get from mental illness when we're well, when we're stable, is we can learn a lot. We can learn a lot about humility. We can learn a lot about wisdom, how to approach life, the fact that we have limitations when there are many people around us who also have limitations, but they maybe don't realize it. We can, I have done quite a lot of videos on like the silver linings of bipolar, like what positive things I got from it. And I'm never going to be this guy who says, "Way, I'm so glad I had bipolar." I just, no way, too much suffering to say that. But I have managed to find a lot of good stuff that came from it. And I was like, holy shit, I have got to find peace. I have to do this. And whereas a lot of people on my spiritual path have quit when they've got to a certain level of happiness, they've kind of, oh, okay, I'm done, whatever. Nothing wrong with that at all. Good on them. But I kind of decided a long time ago, I'm never going to quit until I really, really, really have found peace. And I'm truly happy and stable. And hopefully that will be this lifetime.